The Alpha rejected her in front of 800 wolves. Laughter exploded across the moon circle. The pack's Maid lowered her head, and the moonstone suddenly began to glow. 3 nights earlier, Ayla still believed she was nobody. Every night, in the hollow between waking and sleep, she arrived, a wolf unlike any Ayla had ever seen in the Bloodfang territory. Massive, ancient, shimmering like moonlight given breath and bone, she moved through the dreamscape without sound, without shadow. Her paws left no prints in the silver grass of the dream meadow, yet the ground trembled faintly at her passing, as if the earth itself bowed. Ayla would stand in her dream self, always small, always barefoot, wearing the gray linen dress that marked her waking station. She would watch the silver wolf circle her with slow, deliberate patience, amber eyes holding something ancient and aching, recognition, grief, and fierce, burning pride all braided together. And then the wolf would speak, not in words that sound belongs to, not in the rough, living language of the throat, but in something older, something that resonated in the marrow, in the memory of the blood itself. Queen of the first line, you have not forgotten. You have only been made to sleep. Ayla never answered. She didn't know how. She didn't know what the words meant, only that they filled her chest with an unbearable warmth, as though she were a lamp that had never been lit, suddenly shone what fire was. She would wake before dawn, before the pack stirred, and lie in the narrow cot in the servants' quarters, with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, feeling her heartbeat settle back to ordinary. She told herself the dreams were nothing, a hunger she'd invented to survive. She told herself that every morning for 7 years. She was wrong. Dawn came to Bloodfang territory the way it always did, gray and indifferent, pressing through the iron-barred windows of the servants' wing without warmth or ceremony. Ayla was already awake when it arrived. She had been awake for an hour, moving silently through the cold stone corridors of the pack house, stoking the kitchen fires, hauling water from the lower well, beginning the first of her countless invisible labors. The first warriors entered the kitchen before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. They smelled of frost and iron, the scent of early training in the yard. Ayla stepped aside immediately, lowering her gaze as they reached for the morning bread. "Careful," one of them said suddenly, drawing his plate away as she passed. "Don't brush against me." Another laughed. "Relax, it's not contagious." "It might be," the first replied. "No wolf, no scent, who knows what she is?" A third warrior leaned back against the table, studying her openly. "Still no wolf, Maid?" Ayla kept her hands moving in the wash basin. "No, warrior." 22 years old and still empty inside. That's almost impressive. More laughter rippled through the room. Someone muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Less than a wolf." Ayla scrubbed the iron pot harder than necessary and said nothing. Silence was the safest answer she owned. Her hands were rough for someone barely 22. The knuckles were cracked at the joints from cold water and lye soap. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly from her face, not from vanity, but because the Luna had once grabbed it as a leash during a particularly vicious correction, and Ayla had learned to offer no such easy handles. She kept her eyes down and her movements small. These were the 2 laws of survival in Bloodfang, and Ayla had learned them before she was old enough to understand they were laws at all. The Bloodfang Pack was large, powerful, and proud. Their territory stretched across 60 square miles of dense forest and rocky highland at the northern edge of the continent, bordered on one side by the frozen Mire River and on the other by the ruined walls of a forgotten kingdom that no wolf spoke of directly. They had 800 members at their peak, warriors who moved like violence given form, she-wolves who carried themselves with the easy confidence of those born into strength. Ayla did not belong among them. This was not merely a feeling, it was official pack doctrine. She had no wolf, or so the pack believed. In a world governed by the inner beast, by the sacred bond between the human soul and its wolf self, this absence was not simply a weakness, it was a wrongness, a mark. The Bloodfang wolves treated wolflessness the way they treated disease, with a mixture of contempt and something that might have been fear had they been willing to name it honestly. They were not. "Maid?" The voice caught her in the corridor outside the Luna's chamber, sharp as a thrown stone. Ayla stopped without turning. She'd learned that turning too quickly read as a challenge, and challenge in Bloodfang had only one response. Kira fell into step beside her. She was the pack's finest warrior she-wolf, broad-shouldered and golden-eyed, her auburn hair worn loose in the way that marked dominant females. She was also the Alpha's chosen companion, though chosen was a word that carried many shadows in this pack. "You missed a window in the upper east hall," Kira said, not looking at her. "I could see my breath on the glass this morning. Do it again and I'll have you scrubbing the training yard with your hands." "Yes," Ayla said quietly. "Yes, what?" A pause so brief it was barely a breath. "Yes, warrior." Kira walked on. Ayla waited until the sound of her footsteps faded around the corner before she breathed again. This was the ordinary texture of days. By mid-morning she had cleaned 3 halls, laundered the Luna's ceremonial bedding, restocked the wood for the great hall fire, and been corrected 3 times, once by the Luna herself, a broad-framed woman named Celine whose authority moved through rooms like weather. Celine had a gift for finding the exact words that would strip the smallest thread of dignity from a person, and she applied this gift to Ayla with the focused attention of a craftsperson proud of their work. The kitchen doors swung open with enough force to stripe the stone wall. Luna Celine entered without looking at anyone except Ayla. "You," she said. Ayla stepped forward immediately, hands still damp from the wash basin. "Yes, Luna." Celine lifted one of the polished silver bowls from the preparation table and turned it slowly under the window light. A faint streak caught the sun. The Luna's expression hardened. "Look at this." Ayla moved closer. "I'm sorry, Luna. I'll redo." Celine dropped the bowl deliberately. It struck the floor with a ringing crack. 8 warriors turned to watch. "If you cannot polish a bowl properly," Celine said coolly, "what possible purpose do you serve in this pack?" Ayla knelt to retrieve the bowl. "I will fix it." "Of course you will." The Luna's gaze moved over her gray dress, her cracked hands, the bowed posture. "You should be grateful, Maid. Any other pack would have driven a wolfless creature out into the forest years ago." She released her with a small push. "Finish your work." The kitchen doors closed behind her. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then one of the warriors snorted softly. "Imagine living in a wolf pack without a wolf," he said. Another replied, "Must feel like walking around half-born." Ayla picked up the fallen bowl and returned to the basin. Her hands did not shake, but the water trembled slightly where it touched her skin. The warriors passed through the kitchens at noon and helped themselves to food while Ayla worked around them, invisible and efficient. She heard them talking. They always talked as though she weren't there, which she had long since decided was either an insult or a mercy, depending on the day. "Heard the mating ceremony's been confirmed for the full moon," said one of the younger warriors, a broad boy named Cole. "About time. Alpha Draven's been without a chosen mate long enough. The pack needs the stability." "It'll be Kira. Everyone knows it." Laughter, easy and certain, the sound of people who knew how the world would arrange itself, who had never considered that it might do otherwise.
Ayla kept her eyes on the pot she was scrubbing. The mating ceremony. She had known it was coming. The whole pack had been buzzing with it for weeks, the way packs buzzed around the prospect of their alpha consolidating power. At the ceremony, the alpha would stand before the assembled pack beneath the full moon and confirm his chosen mate. Or, and this was the part that made Ayla's chest do something complicated, the moon herself might intervene, as she sometimes did, and reveal a fated bond. Later, as the warriors finished their meal, one of the younger wolves glanced toward her again. "You'll be at the mating ceremony tonight, won't you?" "All pack members must attend," Ayla said quietly. He smirked. "Good. It'll be entertaining." "How?" "So the alpha can remind everyone exactly where creatures like you belong." More laughter followed. Ayla kept her gaze lowered. But somewhere deep in her chest, something old and silent shifted, like a door remembering it had once been opened. Fate was a word that got used carefully in Bloodfang. The alpha did not much care for things he hadn't decided himself. Still, each night, the silver wolf came to her dreams and called her queen, and each morning Ayla woke and told herself it was nothing, and then went to scrub silver bowls while the pack ate around her, and she believed, fiercely and with great effort, that some lives were simply smaller than others. She saw Alpha Draven only rarely, which was exactly how both of them seemed to prefer it. He was 28. Broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped dark hair, and the kind of stillness that powerful men sometimes carried, the stillness of someone who had never needed to fill a room with noise because his presence already occupied it fully. He led with efficiency and cold competence. His wolves respected him with an edge of genuine fear, which in Bloodfang was considered the highest compliment. When he walked past the kitchens that afternoon, and his gaze swept briefly across the room, Ayla felt it the way she sometimes felt the approach of a storm, a prickle at the back of the neck, a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure. He didn't look at her. She was furniture. She went back to her work. That night, the silver wolf came again. This time she didn't just circle. She stopped directly in front of Ayla and pressed her enormous silver forehead gently against Ayla's chest. And Ayla felt something shift inside her, something that had been locked for a very long time, rattling against its prison. 3 nights, the wolf said. 3 nights until you remember who you are. Ayla woke with tears on her face and no memory of having cried. The mating ceremony fell on the 3rd night. By evening, the entire pack had gathered in the moon circle. Torches flickered between the tall standing stones, and the scent of anticipation rolled through the crowd like a rising tide. Ayla stood near the back with the servants, exactly where someone like her was expected to remain. No one noticed how the moonlight seemed to linger on her longer than the others. The forest clearing known as the Moon Circle was a place that even the most hardened Bloodfang wolves treated with a certain reverence. It lay 2 miles into the deep wood, reached by a winding path that older pack members said had been walked since the first wolves, since the time before cities, before borders, before the world had learned to forget what it was made of. The trees around it were ancient. Black pine and silver birch wound together overhead in a canopy so dense that starlight came through only in needles. In the center of the clearing, a flat stone the size of a house floor lay embedded in the earth, worn smooth by centuries of ceremony. Tonight it was lit by 100 torches on iron stakes, their light warm and flickering, throwing long shadows across the faces of 800 wolves assembled in a great ring. The clearing was thick with the mingled energy of power and anticipation. Wolves in their human forms stood shoulder to shoulder, dressed in ceremonial gray and black. Cubs had been left in the den houses. This was an adult ritual, rank-specific and old. Ayla stood at the outer edge of the gathering, behind the last row of warriors, in the half-shadow where servants and low-ranked members stood. She had been required to attend. All pack members were required at mating ceremonies, but attendance for someone of her rank meant standing where she was invisible, speaking to no one, and leaving when dismissed. She was good at being invisible. She had been practicing for years. The Alpha arrived last, as was correct. He walked through the crowd, and it parted before him like water parts before a stone. He wore no ceremonial clothing, only black, and the torchlight caught the sharp planes of his face as he stepped up onto the moonstone. Behind him, Kira walked with her chin raised, and the crowd's energy shifted, acknowledging what everyone already knew was coming.
Elder Moss stepped forward. She was the oldest wolf in the pack, gray-haired and light, with the deep-set eyes of someone who had watched generations turn. Her voice, when she spoke the ancient invocation, was ready but precise. Under the eye of the full moon, before the bones of our ancestors and the breath of the living pack, we gather. The Alpha stands to declare his bond. The moon stands to witness. Let the truth of tonight be written in the annals of Bloodfang, and let no wolf who stands here tonight claim they did not see what was seen. Ayla shifted her weight slightly. Her feet ached. She had been standing since before dawn. And then, something happened that she didn't expect. A pull. Not metaphorical, not emotional in any ordinary sense. A physical thing, like a cord attached behind her sternum and drawn suddenly taut. She felt it jerk, and her whole body oriented itself toward the moonstone without her permission, the way a compass needle swings to the north. She sucked in a sharp breath and pressed her hand flat against her chest. On the moonstone, Alpha Draven had turned to face the pack. His dark eyes moved across the assembled crowd with a methodical sweep of a man conducting inventory, and for one brief, terrible moment, they stopped. For a moment, Draven's gaze drifted across the crowd. It paused unexpectedly. The maid standing among the servants. Something about her presence tugged faintly at his instincts, not strong enough to understand, but strong enough to irritate him. He looked away quickly. Something crossed his face that Ayla could not name, a fractional flicker, too fast and too quickly suppressed to read. Then it was gone, and he was looking at the crowd again, and Ayla was telling herself it hadn't happened, that she had imagined it, that the torchlight was playing tricks. The pull in her chest did not ease. Draven spoke. A mate is not merely a companion. In Bloodfang, a mate is a declaration of what the pack will be, the strength we commit to, the future we build. I do not choose lightly. He turned to Kira. Kira of the Iron Guard, warrior and she-wolf of exceptional strength, you are my chosen mate. The crowd erupted, cheers, howls, the sound of a community confirming its own expectations. Kira stepped forward, head high, victorious and lovely. Ayla felt the pull in her chest intensify so sharply it nearly took her breath. She pressed harder against it, trying to push it down, to bury it, to make it stop. This was none of her business. She was nobody. She was a maid in gray linen with cracked knuckles, standing in the shadow behind the last row of warriors, and none of this had anything to do with her.
It was Elder Moss who made it stop. Not the ceremony, the certainty. The old woman had gone very still. She was staring out into the crowd, and her eyes, those deep-set, generation-watching eyes, had found Ayla. Her expression was one Ayla had never seen on a wolf's face before. Pure, stark, ancient recognition. "Wait," said Elder Moss, very quietly, but the word cut through the celebration like a blade. Silence fell in ripples outward from her. Before the declaration is sealed, the moon must be allowed to speak. "The moon has been consulted," Draven said flatly. "Has she?" Moss said, and she raised one gnarled hand and pointed directly and without hesitation at the outer edge of the crowd. At Ayla. Every head turned. Ayla had experienced many forms of pack attention over the years. She knew contempt attention and dismissal attention and the particular cruelty attention of those who wanted someone to know they were seen and found lacking. She had never experienced the attention of 800 wolves turning on her in absolute ringing silence. It was enormous. "Her," said Elder Moss. "The moon recognizes her." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone actually laughed. "The Maid?" Even Draven frowned. This was followed by silence. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then it broke under the weight of exactly what you might expect from 800 wolves who had just watched the pack's most prestigious ceremony interrupted on behalf of their maid. Laughter, scorn, the words came fast and overlapped. "The wolfless girl? She can't even shift! Is this a joke?" Celine, the Luna, turned from her place near the front of the crowd. Her expression was carved in contempt. "Enough of this. Remove her. She has no business at the front of the ceremony, and certainly no business being pointed at by our elder." 2 warriors moved toward Ayla. She didn't run. She had learned long ago that running in Bloodfang only made things worse, but she took 1 step back, instinctively. And then Draven spoke, and his voice carried the full authority of the Alpha, which meant it carried like thunder in a stone room. "Bring her forward." A pause. The warriors looked at him. He looked back, and they stopped moving and changed direction. Ayla understood with a cold, dissonant clarity that this was not mercy. This was Alpha's need to control the terms of whatever was happening. She was being called forward not to be helped, but to be managed. She walked through the crowd. The ring of wolves parted, though not kindly, shoulders angled away from her, expressions ranging from bewilderment to active disdain. She felt each step as its own small ordeal, the torchlight too bright, the silence too dense, her gray servant's dress too thin for the cold that was seeping up from the forest floor. She reached the moonstone and stopped. Draven looked down from her from his height on the stone, and up close his expression was unreadable, contained and controlled in the way of a man who had decided what he would do and was doing it. "What is your name?" "Ayla." Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "What Ayla?" "Just Ayla. I have no pack name." This itself was a kind of indictment. Every pack wolf had a family name, a lineage designation. Having none was another mark of her outsider status, her wolflessness, her non-belonging. Draven nodded once as though this confirmed something. Draven's voice carried easily across the circle. "This woman is a servant. She has no wolf, no standing, and certainly no business being pointed at by our elder." His gaze hardened. "I reject any bond the moon claims between us," he said, calmly
deliberately, in front of 800 witnesses. She is the pack's maid. She is wolfless. She has no standing for a bonding claim, and I do not recognize one. The ceremony will proceed as declared. He said it the way you say a thing you have decided completely. Not cruelty for cruelty's sake, efficiency. The swift excision of a complication. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming, not the cruel laughter of before, something sharper, the dark satisfaction of seeing a hierarchy confirmed, of watching the too small thing put back in its place. Ayla stood at the base of the moonstone and felt the words land, one by one, like stones. She thought, I should leave now. She thought, there is nothing left to do here. She thought, this is the shape of my life. This is what it was always going to be, and I have only been pretending otherwise in dreams. She turned to go, and the world cracked open.
It began in her bones. Not pain exactly, not at first. More like the sensation of something enormous pressing outward from the inside, the way a tree root presses through stone, slow, inexorable, indifferent to resistance. Ayla had taken 2 steps away from the moonstone when she felt it begin, and she stopped. After all, she had no choice, because her body had stopped being entirely hers. A sound rose from the earth beneath the clearing. Or rather, a sound rose from beneath Ayla, from beneath the soles of her bare feet, and the earth was only the instrument it traveled through. It was a low, resonant tone, like the lowest register of some instrument too large to be played by human hands, and it moved outward from her in a wave. The torches nearest to her guttered. The frost-stiff grass of the moon circle bent away from her in a perfect ring, as if she had exhaled. She heard the silver wolf in her head, not the night voice of dreams, the full, ringing voice of something awake. It is time, Ayla. It is time to stop sleeping. The light came next. Not torchlight, moonlight, but moonlight behaving in ways moonlight does not naturally behave. It gathered, it pooled from the canopy above, threading down through the black pine needles like water finding its level, converging on the space around Ayla with purposeful precision. Where it touched her gray linen dress, the fabric seemed to dissolve, or perhaps to transform, the gray becoming silver, the roughness becoming something ceremonial and ancient and entirely without explanation. The crowd had gone completely silent again. A different silence this time, not the heavy, contemptuous silence of a moment ago. Something older, something afraid. "What is happening?" said Celine, the Luna, and for the first time in Ayla's 7 years in this pack, the woman's voice contained a crack. No one answered. No one had the words. Ayla felt the wolf inside her, the one she had been told she didn't have, the one she had come to believe didn't exist, the one who had been calling her queen in silver dreams for 7 years, rising. It was not like the shifts she had watched other wolves perform. Those were powerful, yes, but they had a texture of struggle to them, the seam between human and wolf, the visible effort of crossing it. This was something else. This was like a door that had always existed, always been closed, opening now not because it had been unlocked, but because the frame around it had finally rotted away under the weight of years of wrong. Ayla dropped to her knees, not in submission, but in structural necessity. The ground beneath her hands when they touched the moonstone's flat surface lit up, faint lines of silver tracing the ancient carvings in the stone, runes that had been worn to near invisibility by centuries of weather, suddenly legible and luminous. "The moonstone," Elder Moss whispered. "I haven't seen those runes lit in my lifetime, not in my mother's lifetime, not—" The moonstone pulsed again. Once. Twice.
Then the entire circle filled with silver light. The silver wolf emerged. She was everything the dream had promised, and nothing Ayla had understood dreams could actually deliver. Massive, half again the size of the largest Bloodfang warrior wolf, with fur the precise color of moonlight on still water, and eyes that burned amber gold in the darkness of the forest clearing. She had the breadth of something ancient, the specific gravity of something that had existed before this pack, before this territory, before the treaties and the borders and the centuries of ordinary wolf politics. She threw her head back and she roared. Not howled, roared. The distinction was important. It was not the howl of a wolf claiming territory. It was something deeper in the register of power. The sound the first wolves had made in the first forests, before wolves had learned to be careful of how much space they took up in the world. The ground shook, not metaphorically, not as a matter of speaking. The earth of the moon circle shuddered. A physical tremor felt through the boots of every wolf present. 3 torches fell. Someone at the back of the crowd, a warrior, one of the ones who had been loudest in the laughter, stumbled backward and sat down hard in the frost grass and did not immediately get back up. Then the silver wolf stilled, and the moonlight shifted, and Ayla stood in the clearing in her own form again, because the wolf was her. She was the wolf, and the space between them was not a gap, but a wholeness. And the runes on the moonstone blazed like banked stars, and elder moss sank to her knees in the frost. Wolves dropped to their knees almost instinctively. The oldest among them recognized the ancient markings in the silver fur. One of the elders whispered in disbelief, "The Queen." "The Mooncrest seal," the old woman said, and her voice broke on it, broke open like a split stone. "Child, child, do you know what you are?" Ayla looked down at her own hands. The roughness was still there. 7 years of rough work had not vanished in a moment of revelation. But the moonlight still clung to her skin like something recognized, like something come home. "I don't know everything yet," Ayla said. Her voice was different, not louder, not harder, but fuller somehow, as if it had been speaking at half its natural volume all these years. "But I know I'm not just the maid." The silence that followed was the most complete silence Ayla had ever heard. Draven felt the bond slam into him like a tidal wave. The pull he had ignored now burned through every instinct he possessed, and the terrible truth followed immediately after. He had just rejected the Moon Queen. Ayla stepped forward slowly, the silver wolf fading back beneath her skin. Hundreds of wolves still knelt around her. Even the Alpha remained silent. For the first time in her life, the entire pack was waiting for her command. It was Moss who told her. When the initial shock of the clearing had settled into something resembling order, when Celine had been quietly guided away by 2 white-faced warriors, when the crowd had reorganized itself in the uncertain, tilted way of people who have just had their understanding of the world revised without warning, the old elder brought Ayla to the inner chamber of the pack house and told her what she knew. Which was not everything, but it was enough to begin. "The Mooncrest," Moss said, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had not yet drunk, were the first royal line, not the first wolves, the first who were given formal authority by the moon herself. You understand the distinction? Not fully. The moon does not govern directly, she never has, but in the earliest days she chose from among the wolves those who would carry her mandate, authority, not over territory alone, but over the compact between wolves and the natural world, the covenant of the shift, the stewardship of the old magic. Ayla was still.
The moonlight was still doing something unusual on her skin, faint silver at the margins, visible only in darkness. What happened to them? Moss set down her cup, her expression crossed into something old and complicated. Enemies, as always. The Mooncrest line held authority that other alphas coveted and resented and feared in equal measure. There were wars fought openly and others fought in the shadows, poisons, betrayals. The last true Mooncrest Queen, your grandmother, we believe, hid her daughter before the final assault on the royal seat, hid her so completely that the child had no memory of her own name, her own heritage, her own wolf. You suppressed the wolf. Not suppressed, sealed. There is a difference. Suppression fights nature. Sealing works with it. The queen sealed her daughter's power behind a ward of moon magic so complete that even the wolf inside the child couldn't feel the seal's edges. The child grew up ordinary. Her daughter, your mother, grew up ordinary. And then me. Seals are not permanent. They're meant to last long enough to allow safety, long enough for the danger to shift or the heir to grow into the strength needed to hold what they carry. You are 22. The seal has held for 2 generations. A pause. It broke tonight because the moon willed it, because you were rejected in the very place that rejection cannot take root, on the moonstone, in front of the pack, by someone who is bound to you by fate. Ayla was quiet for a moment. Draven. He is your fated mate, has been before the ceremony, though the bond was dormant while your wolf slept. The rejection was the catalyst. Rejection of a fated bond by an alpha on consecrated ground. The moon does not permit it to stand quietly. Moss's expression held something that was not quite sympathy and not quite satisfaction. She answered loudly. Ayla thought about Draven's face in the torchlight, the way his gaze had found her just for a moment before the ceremony, the way his expression had closed, methodical and deliberate when he made his declaration. He knew, she said, not a question. Moss did not answer immediately. That in itself was its own answer. He felt the pull, whether he understood what it was. He's an alpha. He knows what a mate pull feels like. More silence. Yes, Moss said finally. I believe he knew. Ayla sat with that for a long, still moment. The moonlight on her skin, the sound of a pack in upheaval beyond the walls, the memory of 800 pairs of eyes finding her at the clearing's edge. She thought about the gray dress and the cracked knuckles and the window she had been told she had missed. She thought about 7 years of being told in 100 different ways that she was the smallest and least significant thing in any room she entered. She thought, he knew and he chose anyway. She thought, I do not yet know what to do with that, but I will. The night was not yet over, and it had more to say. The first messenger arrived 2 hours after the ceremony, an unmated scout, running hard through the tree-dark perimeter of the Bloodfang territory, carrying the scent of a foreign pack on his clothes. He was brought to the pack house winded and pale, and his message was delivered with the breathless urgency of someone who had been running from what he'd seen rather than to where he was going. 3 packs, moving together. The Ash Ridge to the west, the Iron Vale to the south, and the Hollowed, a pack so old and so far north that most younger wolves thought of them as legend. All 3 had sent forward scouts in the direction of Bloodfang territory, and all 3 were moving with the kind of coordinated purpose that did not suggest casual migration. Draven, receiving this report in the war room with 4 of his senior warriors, looked at the map on the table for a long moment. They know, said one of the warriors. They heard the roar, another said. That sound carried. A wolf call on that register, every pack within 200 miles would have felt it. They're coming for her,
Draven said. His voice was flat. He said it like a fact, not a fear. The Lost Queen's awakening would draw exactly this response from those who benefited from the Mooncrest's fall. He hadn't yet spoken to Ayla. He had been in the war room since she was taken to the inner chamber, occupying himself with logistics and maps and the clean certainty of tactical problems, because those, at least, had solutions he could work out with his own hands. His hands, he noticed, were not quite steady. The pole in his chest, the one he had spent the last 4 weeks convincing himself was not what it was, had not diminished. If anything, her awakening had sharpened it into something difficult to ignore and impossible to mistake. He had made a declaration, on the moonstone, in front of his pack. He had made it deliberately, knowing what she was, or rather knowing what the pole meant, if not its full cause. He had made it because he was an alpha, and alphas did not allow fate to move them like pieces on a board. He had made it because certainty felt safer than the terrifying and unprecedented sensation of not being in control of something as fundamental as the direction of his own life. He had, he was now aware, been catastrophically wrong. Outside, the pack was in a state of controlled chaos. Warriors were being posted on the perimeter, cubs were being moved to the central compound, and somewhere in the inner chamber, the girl he had publicly rejected was sitting with Elder Moss, learning that she was a queen. "Sir." He turned. It was Cole, the young warrior, standing in the doorway with an expression that held its own small revolution. "She's asking to speak with the senior council." A beat. "She's asking?" She said requesting, but Cole hesitated, and something in his young face was processing a reality it had not been built to hold. Which she does, Draven said. He had never said anything that cost him more. She was still in the gray dress when they brought her to the council room. She had not changed it, had not been given the opportunity, or perhaps had simply not asked. It was, Draven thought when she entered, a choice that communicated something, though he couldn't yet be certain whether it was intentional. The council consisted of himself, Elder Moss, and 6 senior wolves who represented the pack's major functions: warriors, healers, scouts, den keepers, traders, and the spiritual liaison. They arranged themselves around the long table in the order of rank. Ayla sat at the end nearest the door, which was the low-rank seat by tradition. For approximately 3 seconds, no one spoke. Then Ayla moved to the seat at the other end of the table, the head seat, the alpha's seat, and sat in it with the quiet, deliberate calm of someone who has calculated that this is the moment and has decided not to flinch from it. Draven felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. He let her sit. 3 packs are moving toward this territory, she said without preamble. I assume you know this. We know, said Draven. They're coming for me. We believe so. Then this is no longer solely a Bloodfang problem. Her eyes moved around the table, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. Not the downcast, apologetic gaze of the Maid, but something level and direct. The alchemistry line carries obligations that transcend single packs. My awakening activates those obligations whether I choose it or not. Anyone associated with Bloodfang will be drawn into what's coming. You're telling us our own situation, said one of the warriors, with a trace of the old contempt. I'm giving you the courtesy of the full frame, Ayla said. I understand that's not a courtesy this pack is used to receiving from me. I'm not interested in holding that against anyone. I'm interested in the problem. Silence. The warrior looked at the table. Draven found himself looking at her with the specific, complicated attention of a man who is being shown something he should have seen long ago. What do you propose? He said. She met his gaze, held it. The pull between them was visible now, not literally, but in the way it shaped the air, the way the council felt it, and glanced at each other in the way people glance when they see something that should not be possible. "I propose honesty to start." She did not look away from him. "You knew, before the ceremony, you felt the bond." The council went very still. Draven did not break her gaze. "I felt something," he said. "I made a decision." "You made the wrong decision." "I'm aware." Nothing in his voice was defensive. The admission was clean and undecorated, and it landed in the room with the particular weight of something a man does not say unless he means it entirely. "What are you—" Moss began, and then stopped because even Elder Moss seemed to understand that this particular negotiation was not hers to mediate. "The bond doesn't obligate me to trust you. Fate is not consent. You chose to publicly reject me in front of the entire pack. I felt every word of it." "I know. I need you to understand that every action or word has consequences, and what happens next with us, if anything happens at all, is going to be on terms that I consent to, not terms that fate handed me, not terms that the moon set, not terms that are convenient for Bloodfang's stability." A long, charged pause. "Those are fair terms," said Draven. He had never said anything that felt more honest in his life. Ayla nodded once. Then she turned back to the map on the council table. "Tell me what you know about the Hollowed Pack's last known position." And the council, almost imperceptibly, shifted in their chairs, shifted the way people shift when they have recognized that the center of gravity in a room has changed, and that the appropriate response is to realign. Kira came to find her that night. Ayla was in the small room she had been given, a proper guest room, not the servants' quarters, something that had required no instruction and which several members of the pack had scrambled to arrange with the anxious energy of people correcting a long-standing mistake. She was sitting at the window watching the frost form on the tree branches when the knock came. She had not expected this particular knock. Kira was still beautiful, still broad-shouldered, still golden-eyed, but her certainty had been adjusted. She stood in the doorway without any of the casual possession she usually wore like armor, and the expression on her face was doing something complicated. "I need to say something." "All right," said Ayla. "I didn't know. I want you to understand that. Whatever Draven knew or didn't know, I had no idea what you were. I treated you the way the pack treated me. Yes." Kira was quiet for a moment. "I treated you worse than that," she said. "I thought it was about rank. I told myself it was about rank. But I looked at you tonight on the moonstone, and I don't know what I thought rank was for, if it could be used that way." Ayla considered her for a long moment. "I don't hate you," she said finally. "I don't have time for it, and I'm not sure it would serve either of us. But I need you to understand that what rank means in this pack is going to change. I'm not interested in being the same kind of queen that was used to justify treating me the way I was treated." "What kind of queen are you interested in being?" Ayla turned back to the window. The frost patterns were extraordinary, complex and symmetrical in ways that seemed too deliberate for nature, and she wondered now whether they had always been that way, whether she had simply lacked the eyes to see it. "A just one," she said. "I think that's harder than a powerful one, but it's the only version that means anything." Kira nodded. Then she left, and Ayla was alone again with the frost and the moonlight and the enormous, still terrifying truth of what her life had become. The morning came blue and bitter, the kind of cold that makes the world look carved from glass. Ayla stood at the edge of the Bloodfang territory, at the tree line where the pack's land met the open highland, where the frost-killed meadow stretched out toward the dark line of approaching wood that meant the Ash Ridge scouts were getting closer. She had slept 3 hours. It had been enough. The silver wolf was still inside her, warm and vast and patient, no longer the dream presence but the reality presence, the truth of herself that had always been there, waiting. She felt its power the way she felt her own heartbeat, constantly, naturally, without surprise. Draven appeared at her side. He did not announce himself, and she did not acknowledge him verbally, and they stood together in the cold light for a long moment in the particular shared silence of two people who were still working out what they are to each other. The Hollowed have stopped moving. Their forward scouts pulled back at dawn. We don't know why. I do, Ayla said. He looked at her. A queen's first full night of awakening. The moon broadcasts it. Every wolf who remembers the old lore, and the Hollowed remember all of it, would have felt the declaration in the night wind. The Mooncrest line is no longer dormant. They're recalculating. Recalculating whether to push forward or retreat. Recalculating whether they want to be remembered as the pack that marched on the lost queen the morning after she rose, or the pack that was wise enough to wait and see what the new order looked like. She paused. The ash ridge are still moving. Yes. They've committed, too far in to pull back without losing face. They'll want an audience with me, or a confrontation. And which would you prefer? She turned to look at him then, and the morning light was on her face in a way that caught the edge of the silver at her skin's margin, barely visible, but there. The wolf was close to the surface, not threatening, simply present, ready. An audience, she said. Confrontation is for people who lack better options. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something that remembered the shape of one. You were always going to be this, weren't you? Even in the gray dress. A pause that held a great deal of what had happened between them. 7 years of his indifference, 1 night of his deliberate rejection, 1 night of everything that had followed. I was always this. Whether you saw it wasn't the determining factor. He absorbed that. Ayla, don't apologize yet. You haven't earned it yet. I know, he said. I was going to say, I'll stand at your side, in this, whatever it becomes, not because the bond obligates me. Because? Because you are the most formidable thing I have encountered in my life as Alpha, and I have the particular failing of being unable to look away from something I don't fully understand yet. It was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever said. It was also, by any reasonable measure, not quite enough, not yet. But it was a beginning. Beginnings were worth something. Stay to my left, Ayla said, turning back to the highland. I'll handle the negotiation. You make sure Bloodfang is positioned correctly at the tree line. You're giving me tactical instruction. I'm giving us the best chance at an outcome that doesn't end in bloodshed. Are you objecting? A pause. No, said Alpha Draven, and he moved to her left. Elder Moss watched from the packhouse steps as the two of them walked out into the cold morning light toward the highland where the Ash Ridge delegation was approaching. She watched the way the frost bent away from Ayla's path, just slightly, just enough to notice, and the way the morning birds, the hardy winter sparrows that worked the frost line, went quiet as she passed, and then resumed after, as if recording her passage. The old woman had lived a long time. She had watched packs rise and fall, watched alphas make decisions that echoed for decades, watched the ordinary machinery of wolf politics grind on through seasons and wars and quiet generational change. She had never in her lifetime seen the moonstone glow. She pulled her cloak tighter and watched the queen walk toward her first morning. Ayla walked with the silver wolf settled in her chest like a second heartbeat, steady, enormous, entirely at home. Behind her, the Bloodfang Pack arranged itself at the tree line, rank by rank, in the configuration that meant we stand behind her, not in threat, in acknowledgement of where the center now was. She thought about the gray dress and the cracked knuckles and the narrow cot in the servants' quarters and the silver wolf in the dark who had called her queen for 7 years while she slept. She thought, I have been sleeping and the world has been waiting for me to wake up, and the world is full of people who would prefer I sleep forever. She thought, They are about to be disappointed. The Ashridge delegation was visible now at the far edge of the highland, 5 wolves, their lead wolf carrying the white-hemmed flag that meant they wanted speech, not combat. She raised her chin and kept walking. The moon, still visible at the horizon in the pale winter morning, seemed to lean in. And the lost Alpha Queen, walking out of 7 years of silence into her first negotiation, walked with the particular gravity of someone who has learned the difference between the life they were given and the life they actually are. She did not run. She had never needed to. In the oldest annals of the wolf nations, there is a passage that speaks of the Mooncrest line not as a dynasty of power, but as a guardianship of covenant, the agreement between the wolves of the world and the wild world itself. The last entry in those annals before the long silence reads, "She does not reign through dominance alone. The first line has always understood that the moon does not love power for its own sake. She loves the ones who carry power gently enough that it does not crush what it is meant to protect." The next entry is dated the morning after the full moon of the Bloodfang ceremony. It reads only this: "The queen has risen, the seal is broken, the Mooncrest lives." She has not yet decided what she will do with the Alpha who rejected her, nor what the fate bond will become in the hands of 2 people both stubborn enough to insist on choosing it freely. The Alpha who rejected her now stood at her side, but one question lingered in every mind beneath the moon. Would the Queen ever forgive him?